So, hello everybody. My name is Nikolaus Thum, and I'm representing today the Technical University of Berlin. I have other hats wearing, but today is the university part here, and it's my pleasure to welcome all the participants. I can see now 40 people have signed up, and I think I will just move ahead now with the introduction, because I think some people might miss a bit of the introduction, but that's not the problem, because the more interesting part will be later on when we'll have the presentations and the discussion. So the objective of today's webinar is, I believe most of the people are with us because you would like to learn where the legislative process with the Standard Essential Patents regulation is at this moment and what is going on. And we are looking forward, of course, to listening to our colleagues from Brussels, from DG Connect, and in particular to Anne von Zukowski from DG Grow, to learn where we are. I will also say a few words in my introduction, but I'm of course not as familiar with the current state of play in Brussels. So information is the first objective. Second objective is simply to have an interesting discussion, and I would say an informative discussion, a fact-based exchange. Most of the people here today, they know that it's a very controversial issue. A lot of discussion has been going on and is going on, and now it's a bit on hold as for the legislative process, I understand, but of course it's a good moment in that respect to continue with the discussion, and that's what we're doing here today. So, hold on. Oops, sorry. So what's on the agenda? We will start with a brief introduction by Emilio Davila Gonzalez from DG Connect and Knut Blind from Fraunhofer Easy on the StandICT. I understand that's the ICT Standardization Observatory and Support Facility in Europe, which is hosting actually this webinar. So thanks for this. Then we will have what I would say the keynote presentation by Anne von Zukowski on the SEPs regulation. And then we will have the interventions by stakeholders here. And we will start with Agnieszka Kupczok from Nokia. We will then change a bit the order. Then it will be Roderick Allen McConnell from Continental, Matthias Schneider, who for many years worked with Audi, Mirko Böhm from Linux Europe, and then finally Patrick Hopkins from Ericsson. I remind all the presenters to stick to their 10 minutes. If possible, maybe be quicker than the 10 minutes, because we would like to save some time definitely for discussion. The mode for discussion is as follows. I will try to collect questions via the chat, so please use the chat room, and we'll try to pick them up and throw them then in the floor for discussion for the panelists. So please use the chat room, and then we should be finish on time by 5 p.m. Latest. Now, what is this about? It's about Standard Essential Patents. It's the SEPsCom 2023-2032 regulation that most of you are familiar with. There is a good definition actually in there, what it actually means, and how this is defined, the overlap between the standard and on the one side and the patent claims on the other side. I'm not going much into detail here because most people are familiar, of course, with this. And I would rather like to focus more on the regulation as such. And here it is primarily, I think it's what we know is that, of course, that the regulation has been proposed by the European Commission in April 23, and there has been actually a vote by the European Parliament in February 2024 with 454 votes to 83 in favor of the European Commission's proposal, and now it's on its way to the European Council, and Anne will then let us know more about where it is and what is going on currently. So I think my personal understanding is that there is 4 main reasons actually for this regulation or objectives, however you want to call them. And the first is to provide clarity with respect to SEP ownership. The second one is to provide clarity about the essentiality. The third one is to clarify the front, fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory licensing royalty terms, to come up with a specific procedure there. And then finally, the fourth point is actually also to facilitate SEP disputes, in particular for small and medium-sized enterprises. There is a couple of specific provisions in there, specifically for small and medium-sized enterprises. And I will just roughly go through this, but not look much into detail here. So to start with, I mean, the newest thing here probably that it's going to be handed all of this with the new competence center that is going to be built up with the European Union Intellectual Property Office in Alicante, formerly known as UAMI, and being responsible by the time foremost for the handling or registration of the European Union trademark, the registry of the community design, and there is also the quite active European Observatory on infringements of intellectual property rights. All the tasks with respect to the SEPs regulation of EU IPO are mentioned actually in the regulation. So this is Article 3. Then there is lots of information on the registry there. I think important is, I'm not going into detail here. As for the registry and also the electronic database, I hope we'll have some, I believe we'll have some discussion on this, because it is quite relevant then with respect to legal actions, whether your SEP has been registered or not registered, and that might be subject of discussion, of course, when we're having our presentations here. Then the second most, for me, most interesting part, because I've been learning, working a lot in this field, is actually on the essentiality checks. So there is a lot of information in there. So who and how the essentiality checks could be carried out, and who has the and who has possibly the initiative to start actually such a process. And there is also detailed information on how to appeal the decisions and furthermore. So there's lots of information on that part. And then number 3, as I've mentioned before, is the front determination procedure. Also, there's lots of information here, and also, yeah, who has to do what, when, and how. Again, we'll definitely probably get into a detailed discussion here. And then there is a set of specific measures, in particular for small and medium-sized enterprises, where, so they have special access fees, I mean, for the office. And then there's also something like a SME, something like SME front terms. And then, of course, when you define the SME front terms, you can most likely should refer to other SME front terms that have previously been established and so on. So quite some measures in here for SMEs. Happy to discuss those as well. As I've mentioned before, I mean, the regulation has been quite controversial from the very beginning, even actually before it's been published, when it leaked. So already the discussion started. This came as a big surprise. And as you can see here, lots of, buzzwords coming up about European competitiveness, innovation is challenged in Europe, and disaster here and there. And this is going to continue. But again, as I've said previously, I'd like actually to focus this discussion more on the contentious issues, on the specific points in the regulation, and what you believe, those might imply, and yes and no, and get away from these big buzzword discussions here. So, and with there, I would like to immediately hand over immediately now to Emilio for the presentation of the StandICT, and then followed by Knut. Please, Emilio, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicolaus, for this invitation. So I'm Emilio Davila, I'm head of the ICT standardization sector in DG Connect. I have been following the standard essential patents issues for many years, maybe too many years now. So it's an exciting topic that we are talking today. But let me say a few words about the StandICT.eu, who is the project organizing this event. So this is a support action that we fund within Horizon Europe program, which aims at promoting the participation of EU experts in international ICT standardization. So it has an open call for proposals to EU experts to be able to participate in international standardization, that, as you know, may be too resource and cost intensive. So it gives grants for these experts to participate and contribute to defend EU values and interest in international standardization. This is the main activity. But then it has other ancillary activities. The first StandICT was funded in 2018, so before the COVID, and then there has been some continuation because we saw the importance of these measures. By the way, if there are any EU expert that is thinking of participating in international ICT standardization, you are welcome for apply to these grants as well. Then, of course, it has a very interesting also stream on academia, developing material to develop capacity buildings and skills on ICT standardization, an observatory also on what is going on for the different technical topics in standards. But the StandICT is also organizing events related to ICT standardization. So, for instance, 3 weeks ago, they organized a very interesting event on the interplay between human rights and ICT standards. And today, we have even a more thrilling topic on the table, which is the standard essential patents. And Nikolaus has already shown some headers of the press when we published our regulation. And believe me, it was much hot topic in some periods in the past. So why, when we think in should StandICT organize this event? Because of course, standard essential pattern is important, in particular for ICT standardization. We need an adequate framework to deal with standard essential patterns, because on one side, it's a way to ensure the sustainability of the ICT standardization system. If you invest on bringing innovation into the standards, then you need to protect your intellectual rights there and have some return on the investment you have made for the added value that your technologies bring into the standardized technology. And then on the other side, it's important for the implementation of the standards that the implementers only need to, if the SEP holders try to endorse their patents, then only are charged with a fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. So the whole ecosystem could work well together. And for that reason, so we explain the position and the vision on standard essential patents in the Commission already in 2017 in a communication. And then, to be honest, my personal impression is that since that moment, and together with the application of the court case on the Huawei versus CTE, I think or because of the market interactions, things have been calming a little bit. But still, we saw some frictions in the market, and we have to take into account that the system is becoming more and more complex with evolution of technologies, new players coming on, and in particular, a lot of SMEs coming for all kind of different application of technologies that are covered, for instance, by communication standards, which include SEPs. So that's why then the Commission proposed on April 23 this regulation that Nikolaus was presenting, which is now, yes, the Parliament has given his mandate for negotiation approved by a big majority, and now we are waiting for the outcome of discussion by the Council. Fortunately, with these new elections and new Commission, it may take a little bit to resume, but we're waiting for that. But I will stop here. Again, thanks to StandICT for organizing this seminar on such important item, and I'm really looking forward to the discussions today. Thank you, Nicolas. I hope it was less than 10 minutes.
Thank you, Emilio. Perfect in time. You took your 5 minutes. Knut, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicolas. First, I'd like to thank everybody who is here as contributor and speaker, particularly Anne, because she's here the main act in this webinar, which is under the roof of the StandICT Academy. I took that over because I was not involved in the previous version, but with the 26th edition of StandICT, we started to develop our own materials on ICT standardization landscapes, ICT standards, research and standardization, and then also patents and standards and open source and standards. And here the idea was also then to have this webinar maybe to complete a little bit the current game rules of the game in order then to disclose then the modules. We had other webinars on open source, which is also an important interface to standardization, and more to come. We had several on geopolitics, but I'm also inviting all the attendants, if you have interesting topics which you want to discuss and share here in these StandICT webinars, please let me know, please contact me, and then we will take that on board. And therefore, I'm looking forward to a very interesting presentation first and then discussion, and give the word back to Nicholas. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Knut. We're ahead of time. Perfect. So, Agnieszka, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
I hope it was Anne who.
Anne is.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
she is the main act. Without her, we wouldn't be.
No. Sorry, and that was my mistake. So terrible, bad chairman here. Sorry, Anne. So that is the presentation we've been looking forward to. Now, I just didn't. I looked at my list, but still, we're ahead of time, so no worries. Sorry, Anne, for that.
Okay, I won't take much time. I don't think I'm the main act. I think.
Please do take a lot of time.
I think all the stakeholders and you participants are the main act, because I'm all ears to hear your views and your questions, and that's coming at a very timely moment. So thank you, Knut, and thank you, Nikolaus, for organizing the webinar and for having me. I prepared a few slides, not very extraordinary, maybe, except for the rest. So give me a second so I can share window. It doesn't show. Entire screen. Could it be that I don't have the right to share at the moment? Cancel.
Maria, could you please have a look? You're the master.
Yes, I think you have. Now I changed some settings. If you still cannot, I will share for you one.
Yeah, okay, let's give it a last try. Yeah. Now it seems to work. I'll have to share my screen. Screen. Yeah. Share. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, it's there. Thanks a lot.
Okay, good. So my name is Anne von Zukowski. I'm Legal and Policy Officer in DG GROW, more precisely in the unit responsible for intellectual property. It calls itself now Intangible Assets, but we're still the same. And I had the pleasure to follow the policy of the European Commission and the EU on standard essential patents since 2012, I think, with an important break, though. I had a sabbatical, not outside of work, but in another policy field during the drafting of the regulation, actually. So I am back since it was published, the draft, the proposal for the regulation, and I'm accompanying it now together with the whole team. And I'm looking mostly into essentiality checks, which will be an important part of our work when we come to the implementation. I would like to actually, Nicholas already did my job, and thank you for that. I wanted to present to you a little bit the parts of the regulation, just as an overview, because I know many of you are familiar with it. Before going into what is more interesting for you, the state of play, where we are and what we are up to, what we are doing right now, which comes at the end. So bear with me a little bit for redundancies. from my perspective, this regulation is a very pretty big one because I've been working on the communication that we had in, when was it, 2017 or so, which tried to nudge industry to get to smoother agreements on SEPs licensing. With not the success that we had hoped for. I know there was Avanti being created right after, but apart from that, disputes continued, and we investigated very thoroughly. I have never seen a policy file with so much analysis and studies and an expert group that was extremely work intensive, not just for us, but especially for the experts. I know somebody knows what I'm talking about. We had a pilot project on to test how essentiality checks could be done in a more streamlined and complete way. So there's a lot of input and many consultations, so many conferences, a webinar series. So nobody can. I can't understand if anybody says that we haven't analyzed this thoroughly. Afterwards, we can of course discuss and what came out of all that analysis, but that was there, just as a reaction to one of the headlines that I saw there on Nicolaus' presentation. The regulation creates at its center a competence center. Nicolaus mentioned it already. We chose the EU IPO as secretariat to manage all of that. We are very aware. Some people think that the EU IPO doesn't know anything about patents. So I think that's going a bit far. But in particular, they are very, very competent in managing data and serving as a secretariat that they have truly proven. And for us, they will just be the facilitator of all the actions under the regulation. And it will be real experts coming from outside that know standardization, that know the technology underlying it, and that know about patents. So you should not worry about it. But it's a very important choice for us because it's an agency of the EU. So there's parliamentary scrutiny about what they are doing. We're not choosing somebody outside that where we cannot control quality work. So from my point of view, it's the right choice, and I don't see any alternative at this point. What will they manage? They will manage a centralized register of SEPs. Some of you may say, well, there's already the ETSI database, but what about other standardization organizations, or is standard essential patents relevant to standards done by other SDOs? So this will be a centralized register, and we hope that it will increase transparency in a more thorough way. And it will also manage more information than what we are used to with, for instance, in the ETSI database. Beyond that, there are two parts of the regulation that serve to facilitate really parties, SEP holders and implementers to come together and to get to an agreement and get products to the market in the best way. So we want to support that and go a bit. Sorry if I'm sharing my screen so you see my emails. So there will be a FRAND determination process, a conciliation process. It's voluntary, but it's not voluntary, but it's not binding, and that should help parties, give them some time to get to an agreement, because this is what it's in the end about: get to a license, and we want to support that and push people to get together. There will also be an aggregate royalty determination, which is for some parties, we hear it again and again, very important to be able to anticipate what they are actually exposed to. What is the total price? I agree that will be difficult, very helpful, but not easy to get to the right amount, because an aggregate royalty that is suggested as a too high price, a non-FRAND price, is not that helpful. transparency, I already mentioned it as a main principle that we are pursuing here via many tools we have under the regulation, the essentiality checks, the register, but also the FRAND determination, which can result and inform, for instance, court procedures. Essentiality checks are a very dear part for me, as I had the pleasure to be the policy officer responsible for a pilot project that we ran together with Nikolaus. I think it came out in 2020, and which is really the basis of our work in preparation of the part on essentiality checks in the regulation. Obviously, the expert group also brought some input into it, but this is very important because we, on the one side, we want implementers to be more trustful into the essentiality of SEPs that they are supposed to license. Many checks have to be run anyhow be it for licensing or for litigation, and here it would be in a more centralized way to the benefit of all. And we avoid repeating the same exercise, and at the same time we believe that this favors actually quality contributions to standardization and disincentivizes over-declaration, the contribution of technology that is actually not essential, or patents that are actually not essential. The aggregate royalty notification, I already mentioned it in the slide before. Here we also see advantages for all parties, the ecosystem in general, as having an aggregate royalty could encourage, in particular also SMEs, to participate in standardization, to adopt standardization and implement the standards more swiftly. Because there's more predictability. It helps SEP holders to understand what is their share in the standardization, and for implementers the advantage is very obvious because they can anticipate much better. The FRAND determination, maybe one word of interest. There was always a criticism: is this FRAND determination, this conciliation procedure that we require before going to court, is that preventing access to court or not? We are convinced not, because it is justified by the special nature of standard essential patents, which give a very strong power, but also because the limitation is very limited. Actually, the day after the beginning of the conciliation procedure, court procedure could already be introduced, but would be stalled during the determination. And once the determination is finalized, the court can take into account its results. So there's really not that much time lost for SEP holders either. And now we get to the interesting part. Where are we? Well, we took a lot of steps, as you can see, through even much before 2022 with all the analysis that we have done. We had the adoption of the proposal more than a year ago. And since then, that very thorny, difficult, complex file has made very good progress, in particular, thanks to the work done in the European Parliament by pressure of the elections for the European Parliament coming up. They really wanted to have a first reading vote before, which they did after the regulation was discussed in 3 committees. Juri being the lead committee, and we have been thrilled by the very positive vote in the Parliament. Nikolaus gave the numbers. It's really a very strong support for the regulation as such. There are modification suggestions, but not they did not take out whole parts. They did not really put into question whether or not we need that regulation at all. So we are really a big step ahead here, I think. And I have good hopes that the incoming European Parliament will stick to that vote or position in the trilogues. But to get to the trilogues, the ball is in the camp of the member states in the council. Also, there was good progress already under the Swedish presidency in semester 1 last year. There was first presentation of the regulation. The Spanish presidency in fall 2023 took a lot of time, or gave a lot of time for discussion of all the articles. So article by article, the regulation has been presented to the member states. They have been able to ask questions in several rounds. I think it's more than 200,000 questions that have been raised and answered in the usual procedure in the council to the member states. And this is as far as we got there. Since then, we have the Belgian presidency, and it's almost it's in its last hours. And SEPs have not been further discussed, but that's not because SEPs are not interesting, but that's because there are so many files. It was actually a patent package that has been published in April 2023, including also several legislative acts, proposals for legislative acts regarding supplementary protection certificates and compulsory licensing. In addition to that, there are, it so happens, important negotiations at the level of WIPO for treaties. So all of that kept the Belgian presidency pretty busy, and it might also keep the incoming Hungarian presidency busy, but we will see whether the file will make progress under their leadership. Certainly, we're also a little bit waiting for the European Parliament to be operational. So that also takes a little bit of time for committees to be filled and parties to distribute the tasks, etc. In that sense, from my point of view, the more important discussions in council, we expect them currently for the Polish presidency, starting in January 2025, with hopefully preparatory work under the Hungarian presidency. But that's just, as you see now, it's hypothetical. That really needs to be seen. One thing, if you want to know my view, is that the regulation is on a good path to make progress and to come through. I truly believe that. Here I gave you a slide. You can, once you get the slides, you will get them. You can take a closer look at the timeline post-adoption. It's a regulation, but it doesn't have impact immediately. There will be 2 years for everything to be set up in the EU IPO, notably, because they need to hire staff, they need to create procedures, etc. We need to create their procedures. But this is something that we absolutely keep in mind. And that's why I'm very happy that I can announce today to you that very recently we published not a study, but the prior notice, actually, the announcement that there will be a call for tender upcoming about implementation aspects. So from my point of view, the most important thing is how are we going to do essentiality checks exactly? Because we need to do them in a qualitative way. Without that, they are not really worth a lot. But at the same time, we need to keep a balance of efficiency. And for that, we decided to get intelligence in, to get the views of experts and additional analysis. And this study will not only look into essentiality checks and some other elements of implementation of the regulation, but it will also look at a bit of market analysis regarding the precise scope and how we handle notifications, for instance. I guess I don't want to go into detail. You will get that pretty soon. I left you here the link, or you just take the yellow underlined number, and you find that on the tender page of the EU. It's a good budget, I think. It's a not very long duration because we are keen to get those results. But please distribute the information, or please make offers once the tender is out. And with that, I thank you for your interest, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. If I may, because actually we've made 10 minutes of time, I just have one question of clarification maybe on your second last slide. You don't have to show it up again. I think you mentioned a period of 30 to 35 months, so after start of the trialogue process. So that is really up to, is that to understand when it is possible that the regulation might get into force? That's the period of time? Do I understand this correctly?
Sorry, I'm not sure what you are referring to. I don't have it in front of me anymore.
Or put it the other way around. I mean, I think everybody, of course, I know it depends on the legislative process. We all know that, but how long could you realistically, looking also into a legislative process and maybe with similar regulations, how long will it take until either, this is going to be rejected, or it might actually, be finalized then in the legislative process? I think very simple.
I think that the element that is currently uncertain is when is the council ready with this position, with the member states' position. Once that is formalized, because that will require a lot of discussion in the council, and let's face it. But after that, it can actually go pretty fast. Until adoption. So the trialogue in general only takes a couple of months or two couples, but not that much. So I don't have in front of me that 35 months. I'm not sure I'm clear about what you mean, but if let's think that member states get an agreement during the Polish presidency. That would be latest in June, in a year's time. Then after that, you have a couple of months for the trilogues, maybe even during Polish presidency. I don't want to exclude that, and then a couple of months for the further adoption. But after that, you have 2 years until the competence center will be operational.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. I think that's in the.
I hope I somehow answered your question.
No. I know it's a vague question because you do not know when it depends on the process, but we understood that the Polish presidency that's when things might happen actually. So.
Yeah, because the parliament still needs some time to be operational. So this is not in the first month of the Hungarian presidency. Otherwise, it could be also them. But I think this is what we are waiting for.
Okay. No, thanks a lot. Sorry for the confusion. I think I have a few more questions, but I keep them maybe for later on when we actually have the discussion and take the advantage of being ahead of time and then bundle the discussion towards the end. So sorry now. Now is my second call now for Agnieszka. Please, sorry. This is now the real call. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nicolas. Can you hear me well? So good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. Thank you, Anne, for providing the European Commission's perspective. My name is Agnieszka Kupczok, and I work in IP policy and advocacy at Nokia. Before we dive into the topic, the usual disclaimer that the views expressed are my own. 10 minutes is a really short time to address the complex and comprehensive issue. As was mentioned, it is a very comprehensive file, the draft regulation on standard essential patents. Today, I will try to focus on 2 aspects. I will address the context, which I have a feeling got a little bit lost until now. So I will talk about the innovation ecosystem. And then I would like to come back to a little bit of what Anna already discussed and look at the scope of the regulation and the register. So first to the innovation and standards ecosystem. I think it's really important to underscore that for about 40 years, industry standard essential patent licensing based on France built the success of network and communications technologies, supported interoperability, and established Europe as a leader in generations of mobile technologies from 2 to 5G, with now 5G advanced being starting to be implemented and the discussions on 6G standardization already having been launched. So this is how consistent industry investment in R&D, together with other actors in the ecosystem, open standardization based on standard essential patents, puts Europe first. And I think that's, as a European, I'm very happy personally to underscore that. This ecosystem, the virtuous cycle of innovation, is embedded in a multi-level international legal framework, which includes, and the list is not exclusive, but it includes international agreements and principles, global licensing practices, regional legal framework like the European Union, global licensing practices, portfolio licensing, multi-level R&D investment, standard development organizations, and as Anne mentioned, we are looking at them more broadly than just the European standardization organizations under the regulation, national and regional patent law, commercial contracting, the jurisprudence of national and regional courts, which already was also mentioned, and alternative dispute resolution centers specialized in patents. So it is a complex system. It is not limited to the internal market of the European Union. It involves several layers of legal provisions and several different actors on national, regional, and international level. But this complex system has been a pretty good success story, one of the best ones Europe has to offer these days. It's not one without a degree of potential, or it's not one without a potential for improvements, especially on SEP licensing efficiency, but it is a success story nevertheless. Unlike the established practice of incremental evolution of the innovation ecosystem, which was outlined before between 2012 and 2017, the current draft regulation on standard essential patents is a cut across this calibrated framework. And it is, from my view, a massive regulatory intervention, which is not supported by rigorous scientific evidence for its need and as to its impact. So it introduces costs and legal uncertainty for all players in the system, which in turn will have negative impact on all participants in this ecosystem, not just the right holders. So the draft regulation proposes a register which introduces a disproportionate administrative burden on right holders who face severe consequences, not just in case of non-compliance, but also in case of typos or minor erroneous entries. So the consequence is loss of right to economically use the patents that fall within the remit of the regulation. The administrative burden is same for all types of SEP owners. So large companies, which perhaps can shoulder the burden, but also it equally applies to SMEs and public research organizations. So the regulation is also mandating the channeling of some parts of public funding into more compliance, more administrative work, instead of the investment going into R&D and standardization, which is what has put Europe on global technology leadership in the first place, which raises questions as to its objectives, if not red flags, if I may, personally. This leadership is currently limited to a few areas, as I just highlighted, and one of them is advanced connectivity. There are two other areas which are all reported on in the recent Digital Europe report. This report also states that complex regulatory frameworks hinder growth and scalability for European companies. Unfortunately, being today and discussing the draft regulation, I can see why the report points these out. Continuing on with the register, the requirement spells out the disproportionate compliance requirements, which strongly affect innovative SMEs who have much lower margins, as was mentioned before. The draft regulation does not spell out the benefit of having another database, in addition to the EPO patent bibliographic data and the ETSI declarations database. Experts will be needed to extract data from the register. Further experts will be needed to assess the relevance of the obtained data for specific business cases. This means that for SMEs to ever use the database, it appears that they will have to pay upfront for patent attorneys and business advisors and business analysts. Which SMEs, and this is my question really, can afford it, and which will actually do it if they have the alternative of simply engaging with industry partners directly? The draft SEP regulation introduces further pillars, as presented both by Nikolaus and Anne, so I will not go into details, but in essence, they are legal mechanisms, they are legal processes. So some players in the market, some companies have in-house counsel, SMEs normally do not, so they will necessarily require legal assistance to participate or even make use of those procedures. Again, this is not costed out by the EC, and the implications have not been considered to date. Legal costs will also increase for all players. Conciliation procedure will add to the legal cost in addition to potential court proceedings. Because we think that conciliation looks a lot like our experience with arbitration, no party involved in the conciliation under a regulation of the EU will take it unseriously. So there will be a lot of resources, legal resources, poured into that conciliation process. And then it is not final because it is non-binding. So the option of court proceeding is still quite the same in existence. The scope of the regulation remains, so now I would like to move away from this and look at the scope, which remains to be defined by delegated acts, which is problematic by itself. But there was already a lot in previous webinars and conference panels on that, so I want to just briefly go to specifics because I think my time is running. So the scope has both prospective and retrospective application, and it refers to standards and SDOs. But just to focus and zero in on these two aspects. So looking at the definition of a standard, the way the standard is defined in the draft regulation equates a standard with a technical specification. What are the implications? What happens if the standard includes more than one technical specification, which is actually the very well observed practice in SDOs? What happens if a standard that includes one or more technical specification is updated, but only in reference to one of the specifications? When will be the cutoff date for such a standard, which is a grouping of technical specifications, should this be the case? Will a release be counted as a specification, or will a release with updates be counted as a specification? Will the compliance be required as of the notification to the competence center, despite the update following in short cadence? Who will set the cutoff date? And how will this bring more efficiency into SEP licensing? How workable is compliance with this kind of standard under the current definition in the draft SEP regulation when the standard is in very early stages of adoption? So when the technology is in very early stages of adoption, which means there will be follow-on and there will be updates to the standard. So again, of note particularly to those right holders, failure to comply with registration requirements leads to complete loss of right to economically exploit the patent, to use the patent right. As a second point, and I'm slowly getting to the conclusion, The draft SEP regulation talks about SDOs, and Anne also said that it is the explicit aim of the Commission to broaden it to other SDOs. So the way SDO is defined is any standardizing body that is not a private industrial association developing proprietary technical specification. This is broad, and then it applies potentially every standardization organization which has non-commercial objectives to fall within the remit of the regulation. So there are several issues with that, right? First, which ones will it be? Where is the list? Will this be applicable globally? Which jurisdictions will be more or less taken into consideration? What number are we talking about? Is it going to be 300, 500, 300 potentially? There are hundreds of such SDOs that fall within the current definition of SDO globally. So, secondly, the SDOs do not always use the same terms as in the regulation. So how comparability between what a specification, what a standard means under the regulation, and what maybe an update to a spec in a different organization in India means, how will this comparability between these SDOs be established? I believe there is quite a lot of, there is a lack of clarity, and this is not some definitions, this is not some details. This is what touches the core scope of the regulation. So we really don't know what we're talking about here. To conclude, the massive regulatory intervention in the form of the draft SEP regulation raises fundamental concerns as to its compatibility with Charter of Fundamental Rights. I didn't have time to get to that. Will raise legal and expert costs to all actors in the innovative ecosystem. It is drafted in a manner which points out a lot of, which carries a lot of legal uncertainty and creates legal uncertainty, which definitely outweighs any other concerns currently. The disproportionate compliance obligations, administrative burden, and additional costs on all actors will weaken the innovation ecosystem in the one area where Europe is currently still leading. And this lead is not a God-granted right. We have to earn it, we have to pursue it. Advanced connectivity is the one area. This regulation will weaken Europeans, as a result, Europe's competitiveness on global scale and concede Europe's leadership in open standardization. The fundamental concern that ties into the register is the lack of clearly defined scope of the regulation. This fundamentally increases legal uncertainty of the draft regulation to the point of making it, unfortunately, unworkable. We all, as Europeans, should be very concerned, and we stand to lose from this draft. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnieszka. Please, I move the floor immediately over to Roderick Allen McConnell from Continental, please.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the introduction. And Anna, much appreciated your presentation. And Agnieszka, thanks too, although it sounds like gloom and doom in the end of the world, which as Continental is more of a provider of products that use standards. You know, we see this as a very positive thing. Same disclaimer from me. I'm speaking for myself, not necessarily for my employer. And I'd like to come back to the really the points that Anna made, and take a look at this, how I see this as good and positive. Maybe give a bit of an explanation why I see it that way. And here I'd like to start with, you know, as Anna noted, this has been going on for a real long time. It started with the studies and research and expert groups. I think Matthias Schneider may tell us about work that went on for years of getting people together to talk about this. All of this in the background of standards that used to be used by just a small clique of companies that had lots of expertise and knew each other. these are now standards are being spread out across industries, whether it be inductive charging that can be used for phones or for cars, video coding, and obviously the different kinds of wireless and telecommunications standards. Now, the automotive industry has known standards for over 100 years. Automotive industry back in 1915 started a small group of companies that they knew each other, they knew the respective technologies, and they pretty quickly worked out a deal, namely that if two companies propose a solution and each of them has a patent on that, you can only get everyone to agree on a standard if those whose patent is chosen agrees to give others fair and easy access to that patent. So I think you can see that for more than 100 years within an industry, there isn't really much problem. And I think in the background of this, the proposed regulation goes a long way to help out those who are not necessarily part of a particular industry to understand what's going on. But here to the status, because I think that helps a lot to understand where I'm coming from. That the commission spent years and years looking at this, came up with their proposal, and then went to the parliament and some discussions and groupings. And then the parliament finally, after studying this for almost a year, they pretty much came back to the commission proposal and said, yeah, well, finally, what had been worked out over the space of years with loads of experts, really, it's probably close to the best solution. So that's what passed the parliament. Now it's in the Council of the European Union. Again, we heard of hundreds of questions. I'm nevertheless confident we'll have sort of the same process as people get to understand what the issues are. That this regulation is not about controlling things. People hear regulation, I think it's going to regulate. I think it's important to understand it as a legislative act that has as its goal to provide transparency, provide information, have bundled expertise so that not every company in the European Union, every time they want to use a new standard, they have to build up a whole expertise. Who has the real patents? How much are these worth? The best thing if you're in business and you have good products and you want to add the newest standard for a sideshow, I'll call it, adding some connectivity, adding inductive charging to, I don't know, a medical device. The medical device is the key element. The inductive charging is just sort of an add-on. You don't want to build up all this expertise for international relationships between standardization bodies and courts and all the many expertises that currently go into finding what's a FRAND rate. You just want to know what the rate is, make your choice. Is it something I want to pay? And if the choice is yes, I want to pay that, then you add it to your product. So now I'd like to go to the current status of the more details on the proposal. This is what is in the proposal for regulation. And I think one key aspect is that these are building blocks that together contribute to what the initiative seeks to do, being position number one, make available detailed information on SEPs and existing FRAND terms to facilitate licensing negotiations. I don't see why this is going to be the end of Europe. I don't see why this is going to be the end of innovation. I think, in fact, it's going to accelerate and speed up bringing new technologies from different fields into new products that can be designed, manufactured, and sold in Europe and around the world. So take these building blocks, just a few comments, one by one. And again, as Anna pointed out, this will all be in a competence center, which is a chance to bundle expertise. Talk to a guy who's at the EU IPO, and he was kind of surprised. There's been a lot of pushback, people saying, how can these people be as expert as those who are doing it already? he said, you know, why should I be less of an expert than a judge? And implicitly, you know, a judge who may also handle criminal cases and inheritance cases, and that judge is handling a FRAND SEP case. Why should that judge be in a better position than somebody who works full time on understanding and deciding on these issues? So anyway, going to the different parts. The first one, the register. You know, people who come new to the SEP topic, they always tell me, yeah, well, don't you know which the patents are? And I say, no, you know, in today's environment, you don't know until people come to you maybe 5 years down the road and say, by the way, I happen to have an SEP and I'd like to have money going back 5 years. So this transparency, you know, you kind of need it, and I could imagine most experts would need it. I know that at one point Continental paid several million for a study, essentiality study for a certain standard, and we bought it used. It had been originally financed by a smartphone manufacturer. So if that's your ticket to entry, that everyone who wants to include a new innovative technology into their product has to pay a few million, I don't think that's as good a system as what's proposed by this register, where you have one place in Europe where people voluntarily say, you know, I believe that I have a patent that's essential. And the requirement to register, I see it like you have to register a car before you can use it on the public roads. Otherwise, you're allowed to keep it in your garage. No one's keeping you from doing that. And of course, these losses, if you don't register your patent, they only apply to the one standard for which it's to be considered a standard essential patent. It's not like you lose your rights in general to the patent. It's just specific to this factor of being essential to a standard. And you want to claim money for it being essential to the standard. At that point, just like with a car, you register your patent and then the whole system starts. Next thing is the essentiality check. And here, you know, this is something where I think it's something real. You know, this is in real life licensing. One of the things you do is look at a patent and say, you know, is it relevant to the product? Does it look to be valid? Yes or no. But I think in real life, it's a bit more nuanced. You don't say yes or no. You say, you know, how likely is it? And just as a mind game, I took a look at the regulation. Does regulation allow for, you know, what I would do in real life, what I see colleagues doing in real life? And the answer is yes. If you say the essentiality check doesn't give you the absolute yes or no, only a court can do that. But if the essentiality check says, well, I think with 90% likelihood, this is going to be found essential and valid by a court, or I think with just 10% likelihood, this patent is going to be found valid and essential. That's really useful information for the following steps. That's really useful information. 10 patents with a 10% chance are, you know, maybe worth about as much in licensing as one patent with a 90% chance. So that's kind of real life coming in. And now there's nothing in the regulation that says exactly how the results have to be presented, which I think is a good sign that this regulation is flexible and powerful, and for me is a reflection of what experts might do in real life today. Now I'd like to just touch on the other two key parts, the brand determination. Here I think we have a great chance to really fill a gap in the current framework in Europe. You know, the colleagues in the US, where as I mentioned, with automobiles, you've got standardization for over 100 years. They say, well, you know, if there's a dispute, why don't you just go to the court and ask them to say what a FRAND rate would be? And I tell them, well, you know, it's not that easy. It's not the way the European system works. And this FRAND determination would fill the gap. And here's how. That the Huawei ZTE framework says that, you know, the patent holder, the SEP holder, comes to someone using the standard and says, you know, you've got to take a license, and the person who's using the standard is then they have to express their willingness and do the steps that show their willingness. But I think it was Judge Arnold, or maybe it was Judge Milor in the UK, who said, you know, it's kind of hard to see if someone's willing to take a license on FRAND terms if you don't know what FRAND terms are. So as the German Judge Hoffman suggested, with this FRAND determination, when that's available, you know, you have something on the table, you have an offer on the table that's somebody with their expertise, and you know, maybe they're not perfect, but there's somebody who does this regularly. They say, you know, I think this would be a good FRAND rate. And that means, particularly as an implementer, where you may not have the experience and years of experience in a certain standard to judge, you know, what's roughly a FRAND rate.
Well,
You can then say, well,
please come
I'm
to
willing.
that. Sorry.
Okay.
Sure.
So this FRAND determination can give the willingness new meaning as an objective test instead of subjective. Did you send lots of emails and make telephone calls and have meetings? It's objective. The offer was on the table. Did you take it? Are you willing? Yes or no? Thanks.
Thank you, Valerie. I think this was a very good counter perspective onto what we've said previously, and sorry for cutting you off there, but okay, equal chance.
Not a problem. Give everyone that chance.
For all of us, or all of you. And now we'll move over to Matthias Schneider, and also I mean, you Matthias is not anymore with Audi, of course, but you have been working for Audi for many years. So I assume that you also provide your personal perspective, but underneath, I assume that there will be a lot of automotive perspective in there. And I think this is, of course, a particular and very interesting perspective in this whole discussion, because many of the cases out there came actually from the automotive sector. So please, Matthias, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe one introductory sentence to my person. I've also been a member of the SEP expert group that the Commission founded, I think, in 2018, and it still has not been dissolved. Also, nothing has happened over the last 3 years. So let's see how long I will remain. You know, it's kind of interesting to see that all the targets that the Commission has tried to address with the proposal have been discussed extensively in the SEP expert group. So what you won't hear from me that I don't like the targets and that I don't like the ideas that are in this Commission proposal. So the transparency of the SEP landscape, FRAND conditions, the SEP registration, essentiality assessments, and the two financial issues, aggregated royalties and FRAND determinations. We've discussed these in these 3 years when the SEP expert group was active in endless sessions. And I fully agree that those are important issues that need to be addressed and where we need more clarity. The problem that I see is, and this is something that I would like to discuss in the next 10 minutes, are the tools that are now being proposed adequate to really solve that issue? So while I fully agree with the targets, my question is, can we achieve it in the way it's being proposed now? Let's go through the 5 points very shortly. And I will finish with a more global evaluation of what could the consequences be if the proposed regulation really comes into force, and what would I think would be then. I think the devil is in the detail in these all these topics. So let's go to the SEP database first. I'll just ask you questions. Do we really need a new database which competes with the EPO database and with the STO-hosted declaration databases? Admittedly, we have only one good STO-hosted database, and that's the declaration database by ETSI. There is IEEE has something which is in my opinion, fairly useless because it's just too incomplete, and all other standards definition organizations or SDOs do not have databases that could be used. Or they have a different purpose because they are negative declaration databases. I'm not willing to license a specific patent. Will the users understand why what's the difference between this new database and the EPO database and the ETSI database, for example? Why they are different? What is the purpose of those databases? Wouldn't it have been better to say, let's use the EPO database and add the issues on essentiality into the EPO database? That would also solve another issue, which I will mention later, and that is the Europe centricity of this entire approach, which in my opinion might cause problems because friend licensing, SEP licensing is a global business. What's the incentive for SEP owners to register their SEP? Or even more importantly, to register all their SEPs, because if they only register a few of their SEPs, the database would be incomplete because licensing will be done on all standard essential patents. But if not all standard essential patents are registered at the database, there could be an issue there. Is the Article 24 in the modified version sufficient to nudge SEP owners to really register all their SEPs, or is there a risk that many of the SEP owners will find clever ways to avoid registering their SEPs? Since we don't know anything about the cost, especially for SMEs, I think that if that is not set up correctly, there will be or might be an issue here. Will there be unintended consequences of this obligation to register SEPs? I'll discuss that at the very end again. One of those unintended consequences could be that people do not negotiate, do not litigate patents in Europe anymore. They decide to go to the United Kingdom or to the US or to China because there you don't need the registration. So, and the final question I really have is, why do we have to educate a new player, the UIPO, on this topic? We have got lots of experience at the European Patent Office, and I'm not internal to the discussions, but my proposal would have been very clearly, let's look at the EPO database, let's look at the EPO and see what we can do with them. Second topic, the essentiality assessment. Those who have proposed this all these issues on the assessment, have they understood what the workload is required for the required assessments, especially in the startup phase? If you just look at 5G, we're talking about 70,000 standard essential patent families. I have a problem understanding how we can get a clear picture of the 5G landscape, for example, if we just look at 100 essential patents per year from each of the big patent holders and even less patents from the others. It's going to take at least a dozen years before we have a clear picture here. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just asking, how will it be done? And then there is this issue that small enterprises are exempted from this annual selection of patents to be assessed. Do we really believe that small enterprises have better patents? And could it be that especially those small enterprises that later behave as patent trolls will become the real danger? And we don't even know about the quality of their patents because they have never been assessed. Just two questions that I believe were, again, I think that the details, how this should be done, really need to be understood closer. The aggregate royalty assessment and the notification of this aggregate royalty, I think it's a laudable target. The industry would like to see something like this. But the important issue is this assessment should not be based on the contents of the SEP database. It is unrelated to the SEP database or to the standard, right? Aggregated reasonable terms should be related to the value the standardized technology adds to the value of a licensed product. It's also licensed product specific. and it should not be related strictly to the number of SEPs related to that standard. One question that I have is here, wouldn't it be better to have an agency model similar to the German copyright levy system, where we have an arbitration panel at the German Patent Office that deals with how high should the copyright levies be for specific products. Something similar could be that the EPO could have an arbitration panel that says we believe that the value of 5G or the value of 802.11p or whatever you want to look at for a car or for a smartphone should be X or Y, and that can be then questioned in court if the parties don't agree to that opinion. To me, that would make more sense. As I said, it's just, I'm not saying it can't be done, but I don't know whether it can be done correctly. Next small point, friend determination. Again, it's an interesting concept, the way it is proposed, but why is it European-centered? If I later close a license agreement, it will be a global. The second issue is what really needs to be determined. We're always talking about friend terms determination, but 99% of the terms are all set. If you want to know about friend terms of a license agreement, with the exception of the value of the license, you can look at the Burst decisions, for example. He has complete contracts, which he says those are friend, and the only thing that I need to determine is the value. So friend determination in the end will not deal with terms, it will only deal with the monetary part of that.
1 minute, please.
Yeah, there is a complex interplay between licensed products, number of SEPs, and so on. And I'm not sure that the complexity is really well understood here. And again, what I said before, the contents of the SEP database cannot be the basis for the determination. Okay, very shortly, final, more global issues. What I see is if the SEP regulation come in, I see a risk that you're weakening the role of the UPC because litigation might move to other legislations. So until the regulation comes into force, the UPC will have a beautiful time of many cases, and as soon as the SEP regulation is implemented, those cases will move to the UK, China, or Brazil, or the US. I see a risk that we are weakening the European standardization process. That standardization will move eastwards to Asia. It's happening anyhow, but it might go much faster. I see a risk that pools might decide to be created exclusively outside of Europe, so that they are not subject to the regulation, and they will do their licensing from in places where the European approach doesn't hold. And the final thing is, my last point is, I believe that the input that we can receive from the UAIPO, if this really works, might be of very limited value in non-litigation licensing situations. And that is something that you really should look into more detail. What can you do to make those 95 plus % of all the negotiation cases more efficient, where we don't go through litigation, where in the end the parties agree? And I believe, as I said, I'm worried that whatever we can get from the UAIPO database and from all the processes might not be of high value in those situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. And now I move the floor to Milko Böhm from Linux Europe. Please, Milko, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nikolaus. Hello, everybody. I will keep it very brief because I'm representing kind of an outsider opinion here from the open source ecosystem that looks onto the negotiations between SEP holders and implementers, but doesn't really like overlap with this environment very much. But I first want to point out that in this discussion on how do we encourage innovation and how do we make the European economy competitive, they're not just two areas, there are three. There's a whole ecosystem of open source collaborators who in the last 2 decades have grown to share about 80%, to be included in about 80% of all digital products, and to be about 90% or more in terms of lines of code on all digital products that were practically relevant today. I want to point this out because all these products are shared in a way that all agreements are agreed beforehand, where no negotiation is necessary after the technology is being used or integrated into products. Where especially everybody is free to use, modify, study, and redistribute these products for any purpose. This has been a major driver of innovation, and in particular, it represents an alternative approach to innovation. It achieves interoperability and knowledge transfer. And this is not in kind of in opposition to the SEP regulation. I just want to basically remind that the part of our economy where innovation is driven based on standard essential patented technology is actually a small one. The maybe surprising reaction from our side is that the Linux Foundation welcomes the policy goals of the SEP regulation very clearly. The increasing transparency, especially through the register, reduces inhibitors that we have to the collaboration in our organizations. I said earlier that this idea that all agreements are in a way implicit and upfront creates a very strong hesitation against any environment where it is not sure if all the rights to technologies are secured before products are being developed. And that means that open source collaboration usually doesn't happen in areas where negotiation later after products are being developed is still required. And so knowing where this is the case and where it isn't is a benefit to us. The information asymmetries that are mentioned in the policy goals are also real, and they're felt strongly in our environment because we are forming a space for collaboration that operates according to different behavioral norms than the traditional environment of working, for example, in standards development in pre-competitive environments. In our environment, there is an expectation that every participant is transparent about the intellectual property rights that they represent, and that they're willing to share them, and that these agreements should be done early in the process, not late. And then finally, facilitating friend agreements, primarily the impact on our ecosystem is that it reduces frictions for implementers, especially if we're in an environment where general purpose computing systems on a chip are used. This is something that we've mentioned a couple of times in research, where because today's systems from the smallest to the largest incorporate all sorts of technologies, they require management of a very large amount of patent and other IPR rights. So in short, I've heard the criticism from other parties, but the reaction that I see in the open source ecosystem, and I can speak here for the Linux Foundation, but others said the same, is that we welcome the policy goals of this regulation and hope that it gets implemented. I do want to point out that there is a whole world to standardization that is outside of FRAND and SEP. I'm showing here a graph from our report on open standards. I'm referencing it at the end. And one of the interesting responses here is the difference in evaluation of open versus closed standards, where many of the impacts of that we want to see of standards being implemented in the market are attributed way stronger to open standards compared to restricted ones. And this is important because going for FRAND and SEP versus open standards is a path decision. You can't really combine them both because you're essentially deciding for a negotiation model upfront, ex ante or ex post, and they can't be mixed really. Similarly, here you see how do organizations see that the value of standards can be realized. At the bottom, you see that only few agree strongly that patent royalties are necessary to implement a successful technology. And this is all I wanted to share today. Have some more quotes here, and there you find the reference to the report. And I hope this provides some contrast to the framing that without France, Europe will go under. Thank you.
Great, many thanks, Mirko, for your contribution. Now we have the last speaker here, and so Patrick Hopkins from Ericsson, please.
Thank you. So I speak not on behalf of Ericsson, I'm speaking my own name. And being last has the difficult task that all the notes that I made, all the preparation I made is totally superfluous, because everything I want to say is already said, especially by Matthias. I thought what Matthias presented was super interesting because it highlighted the complexity of where we arrived. It's true that this regulation went into record time through the Parliament. It's true that there's been a lot of files made before, that a lot of studies have been done. But it's also true that the solutions chosen in this regulation are new. And it's also true that the regulation is of a complexity that is very, very difficult to understand after third, fourth, fifth reading. It is really very complex. And it is complex because the context in which this regulation situates is an international context. The license agreements, as Matthias said, are international. The SDOs are international. The regulation is very often international. There is collaboration between different actors in this field. And so putting in there an EU regulation is super complex because of the interdependencies, because undesired effects. I'll give you one example that is very telling, I think, which is the scope. So the regulation has an opt-in, opt-out possibility, which basically means that if there are problems, let's call it that way, the regulation can be applied to existing standards, existing patents, etc., etc. And the regulation then also says if that happens, the regulation cannot have any effect on existing contracts. If you now start to try apply that in the international dynamic context, you immediately start to have massive questions, because the non-impact on contracts can be decreted from an EU perspective, but most of these contracts are not under EU law. They're under US law, they're under English law, they're under Chinese law, God knows what. And so the impact there is not clear. If you start having old patents being captured by the regulation, it's actually only the old EU patents, because the regulation only talks about EU patents. And so yet another problem. How do you work with retroactivity? So that is not clear. So we're in a position at the moment where we have not really answered a lot of the big legal questions. The president of the UPC has made in his inaugural speech a clear reference to that, the access to court question. And no, it's not only about the 9 months. The registration is also a massive stumbling block for access to court. So, you know, if you have not registered your patent, you cannot enforce it. So there are limitations to rights that I don't think will pass the proportionality test. That is still not resolved. That still needs to be discussed. The question on the WTO effect, the question on competition law, you know, the aggregate royalty is a very new procedure. Is that all okay from a competition perspective? And so there are many questions of the legal framework, very high level, big questions that have not replied. And at the same time, we're only starting to grasp some of the details today that are really important to address. Matthias has already referred to some. Let me add some others. The register. The register will cover standards and technical specifications from many different SDOs. We have seen in ETSI how complex it is to get a coherent database that uses the terminology of 3GPP next to harmonized standard terminology into one database. This is not easy. This is complex. Now you need to add ITUT, you need to add IEEE, you need to add DVB, and I can go on. They have all different ways of describing this. This is not, you know, the fact that you're a specialist in databases is fantastic. It's a great start, but it is far from sufficient to create a coherent database. Continuing on the register is a register of SEPs, but it is not only a register of SEPs, because it's also a register of technical specifications, of standards, of implementations, of ownership, of terms and conditions, etc., etc. That is quite a matrix that you create. And then on top of that, you have an evaluation where the regulation describes its maximum 1 member per patent family. A patent family can apply to a UE, can apply to a network, can apply in UEs, you can apply to a car, can apply to something else. The fact that one of these things are essential to a standard may be irrelevant for the concrete application or implementation that you're talking about. And so you create a false impression, for lack of a better word, of essentiality. These are detailed things, but these are super important things. If we're talking about transparency, we need to be clear and correct on what we can expect this to do. And so for the moment, what I'm seeing is a super complex register with a lot of requirements, but I'm not so sure about the positive impact on transparency. And why is that? Because what we're looking at is basically not a register for a register, an essentiality for an essentiality and all these things, but we're looking at basically a bilateral negotiation or a negotiation with pools with a focus to get to a license agreement. And so as long as that purpose is not taken as a sort of guiding principle to see how we can make this better, I think we're going to create duplications, we're going to create a lot of systems, but I'm not so sure how effective these systems will be and how efficient. On the policy angle, I understand that this is not always very interesting, but there are questions that I think we need to ask ourselves. And it's not about doom and gloom and these things. It's more about the fact that if you look at the impact assessment, it is very clear that the Commission writing the impact assessment recognized that the benefits of the regulation are going to the implementers and that the burdens are on the patent holders. It's just written like that in the impact assessment. That can be a policy goal, but it's strange that at the same time the policy goal is to make sure that we keep up with other geographies in the world to do standardization. And so it's not so much that you need to favor one or the other, but if you want to create incentives, I think it needs to be a much more inclusive exercise to see how we can actually make this thing better, rather than having a system that I think is going to create a lot of bureaucracy, but not a lot of real effect in terms of improving licensing negotiations as we speak. Last point, and then I will round off because there will be many questions, I think, and that is to do with the rushed approach. I don't know how we can do this, but at the moment, the dynamic that we have created is one where we have not had the time to really go into some of the details. And these details are needed. And I can give you again some examples of definitions. One of the definitions refers to recommendations. Recommendations cannot be a basis for essentiality because it's not a requirement. It's a detail, but it's an important one. The other definition that Agnieszka has referred to, standards and technical specifications, that definition overlaps. That has a massive impact because it's not clear what we're talking about. Claim charts, the definition of claim charts is a low bar. If we want to improve, then we need to put the bar much higher. And so the regulation will require a lot of real detailed attention to get it as a qualitative system, because I think one thing that we all can agree on is that if intervention is needed, if an intervention of this deep nature is required, then I think we need to strive at making this a qualitative intervention that really can get the system to a better stage, and not just a system to create more information that is not really useful or not effective for improving licensing. And I will stop there for the moment, understanding that there will be more discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you, everybody, all the speakers. I think this was quite interesting. I took away more concerns, more criticism, but also there is also a slightly overwhelming criticisms, I would say, but this is probably also because of the number of the people that we're presenting here. But I would like to, of course, provide you now the floor as much as possible for answering questions. I have collected actually only 2 direct questions here. I'll get back to them in a second. But actually, I think one of the most important points, it's my personal takeaway, is, of course, as always with these things, it's the level, the devil is in the detail, and it will a lot depend on the specific implementation. And there's still a lot of leverage. So how this is going to happen and so on and so on. And we do not know about it. And I think that is, Anne, I think that is probably part of the intention of the study that you have mentioned at the beginning, that now, of course, there should be something like a guidance of how now to implement this. I mean, whatever the final regulation will look like, but I believe that's the intention. But with that, I would like to maybe, Anne, address you directly also, because that came up with a couple of people, I understood. I mean, this is more a general question, and it is still actually about the players here. So the EU IPO and EPO has been mentioned a couple of times, and then ETSI, of course, also. So why this EU IPO? You have hinted a little bit at the beginning. So why EU IPO has been chosen, and I think there's good reasons for this. But maybe you could say that again, or maybe with a little bit more in detail, and also maybe, if possible. I mean, I know there's a lot of politics involved, but the specific connection there also with EPO. I mean, EPO has positioned itself. I mean, in the past, also already when we were setting up the project, of course, but then also recently, I think. But as far as you can, of course, I think it's important to know who does what and why, I think. And then also maybe you hinted the related question is a little bit on, it is partly outcome of this study that you will look at, but it's, of course, this try to make a little bit clearer also, where to bring from the expertise. You said that at the beginning. I mean, that indeed it's not the EU IPO. I think we all agree on that. But, so if there's already some ideas out there of how to bring in the expertise, I mean, that would be much appreciated. But these are more general questions, and then I will get back to the more specific ones that have also been risen in the forum. But then, please, I also would like to ask the audience, I mean, make use of the time now. And meanwhile, Anne is answering. Please, if you have any more questions, please send them into the chat room, please. So, Anne, please.
Yeah. We have actually indeed lengthily thought about who could be the competence center, who could manage it. And it needs to be a place for that we can have some control over from a governance perspective. So we cannot create an EU regulation committing the EPO, where we are not the only members. So that is very difficult, even if you may say the management of the unitary patent is another example, but that would at least require the EPO to want to do that, and that signal we have not had. But even then, I think it is much cleaner if we in the EU work with our agencies in the EU, and then you can look at what agencies do we have as an alternative to the EU IPO. So if you want to go for plant varieties in Angers, that was even submitted as an idea, but I don't think they are much more competent, and they don't have the size for that. It could also be run within DG Grow in theory, but we are policy maker, director general, so that would not be appropriate as well. So in some, it really comes from an institutional perspective of the EU. The study, I'm sorry. I mean, we have a prior notice about the study, but we don't have the tender out yet, so I cannot go into the detail of what it is going to do. But certainly, it's said in the title, it's about implementation aspects. So a number of the questions that have been raised today might well be addressed under this study, but I can't promise it at this stage. But we are consciously thinking about, I mean, we are aware that the devil is in the detail, and that there are open questions, and that we want to know and to be prepared to give answers to how we would like to implement in the end. Where does the expertise come from? Well, there needs to be some expertise hired in the future by the EU IPO just to understand how to run a database on standard essential patents. That's for sure. They cannot do without any expertise that understands the substance of this matter. But the real larger expertise we expected to come from outside. For instance, with respect to essentiality checks, we have already invited national patent offices to think about whether their examiners could do that. We would like, I mean, personally, I would like this, the circle of potential experts to be as large as possible in order to raise the bar and have as much quality and expertise as possible. That would then also include the private sector, but we need to be very careful, of course, with the quality mechanisms and to avoid any bias. So that's something that we need to think about in detail. I hope that answers your questions, Nicolaus.
Well, thank you, Anne. But I do not want to address you only. So I mean, I think this would be unfair. But I think Roderick, I think you'd like to react or have a comment to make on this, please.
Yeah, I would like to make a comment or even a provocative statement. I would say that in one very important respect, the EU IPO is the best possible office. And this is in the economic aspect. I'm admitted as a patent attorney in Germany and at the European office. And one of the things we learn in our training is that the questions of validity and infringement are not decided by the market. This is different for trademarks. A trademark, one of the ways that a trademark can get its validity is through market acceptance. So this is something, and when I talk to a fellow who's at the EU IPO, the one who encouraged me that they are competent people too. This is one of the things that we discussed, that at the EPO, there's no discussion of markets. It's about prior art. It's about expert knowledge in the field. This is different at the EU IPO, which actually has, as one of the aspects it often has to consider, the market factors and market acceptance. So from that perspective, I think it's, again, the best choice of offices. And I think in general, a lot of the discussions we've been having, some of the criticisms are that, experts with a lot of knowledge would do something that's not described in the regulation, almost as if we want the regulation to know everything that an expert would know and do everything that an expert would do. I think my thought game with, if we want to do real life, the essentiality check is something you see, how likely or unlikely is it on some sort of a scale that a patent is actually essential. That fits into the regulation precisely because I see it as a framework within which experts can do their job. And I have confidence in the experts, be they at the EU IPO or experts at the EU IPO hires to do this job. So just some thoughts from my side. Thanks.
Thanks. So I have Matthias, Agnieszka, and Patrick in the row, and now please be brief and precise. I have two more questions I'd like to ask because these questions came from the audience. Please, Matthias.
Thank you. My point is that I don't really think we need to discuss who is going to do this, but what should be done is the important issue. And with the decision to create a new database at a complexity that is unbelievable for most computer scientists even, and believing that this will work, it will be a challenge. I mean, Etsy has taken about 25 years to create a database that's barely usable, to be fair, but it is somewhat complete by now. Do we really expect that the EU IPO will get something done that is similarly unusable or better usable in a shorter point of time? I'm not sure. But even if we were to decide that all the SEP the patent-related stuff should be connected to the EPO, and the new database should only cover other aspects like the financial and economic aspects, it would still be a challenge. But if you think about the registration process, there's this one question by Andreas Reuter on the chat. Why would the question really is, or my main criticism is that the regulation has negative incentives for patent owners that do not register their patents, instead of thinking about having positive incentives to register the patents. And I think this is one of the major deficiencies in this entire proposal, because if you have a negative incentive, you cannot enforce your patent, you cannot get money for the patent. The solution is for every patent owner, how can we get around this? So I will try to avoid this. If you had a positive incentive, that it may really make sense for you. For example, because if you register a patent and you go into litigation, then you get an advantage because it's already essentiality checked. Then it might work, but then you will certainly not get a complete list of all SEPs in that database. So there are so many aspects that you really need to look at when you want to become operational. It will take time, and whether that is being done. Who does that is for me only a secondary issue. I'm just worried that the UIPO, also the financial economic considerations might not be in the perfect hands. But this is something that is beyond my know-how, so to speak.
Just if I may intervene, I mean, may the positive incentive come via actually the enlarged economies of scale that you get by actually providing a one-stop shop for people, as it had been indicated by Mirko, but also I mean by Roderick previously, that they would actually like to have something like this, and probably many other implementers. But I put that as a question.
If you do that on the EPO database, what you get is immediately the global issue, because the EPO database allows you to look at patent families on a global level.
But you don't have the SEPs information in there, I'm afraid.
Yeah, this you would have to add that here. But if you do a new database, you have to do it the other way around. You somehow have to connect the information that's in the EPO to that database, because otherwise it's again incomplete.
Okay, sorry, Agnieszka.
Yeah, thanks. I actually have 2 points. One, and both actually tie back to what Matthias just said, and then one of them ties back to Anne's point as well. So one point is just overall in general, which I just didn't want this to be kind of leave the discussion without saying this. No database in the world increases the willingness of parties to negotiate a license. So there is still, for me as an expert, having worked in this field for quite a while now, there's a disconnect between what actually this regulation is trying to achieve, so efficiency of SEP negotiations, and the actual requirements and the actual mechanisms. So this is for me a disconnect. And this ties back to what Matthias said, that a positive incentive for right holders to undertake registration would be a much more elegant solution, if I can say it this way. The other point goes back to governance. So I agree with Matthias that it is not essential to decide today which institution will do it. But governance is not to be overlooked either. And so, Anne, you mentioned that EPO is not a natural choice because it lies outside of the EU jurisdiction, let's say, or influence, scope of political influence. How about ETSI then? We know that ETSI is an European standardization organization recognized as an ISO under the regulation. We know I actually have met Emilio personally many times in the ETSI IPR special committee. So we know that the Commission is involved in ETSI, is present, understands who is there, that all the right holders involved are very involved in the ETSI IPRSC meetings. So wouldn't it be a solution sort of midway between the radical EU IPO and radical EPO to look at ETSI, its database, its expertise in running and setting up a database, which has its challenges, surely, and we see as a user of the database as well that not everything is running always smoothly. However, we have a database. How about improving that and focusing on what additional capabilities have to be included to make it more practical, let's say, for groups like SMEs or implementers? Yeah, that would be my question for now. Thanks.
Hey, Patrick, please.
Yeah, on the topic, who should do it? I agree that who does it is of less relevance than enabling the one who does it to become good at it, to have expertise, to have quality, consistency, and all these elements. So that's a first point that I think is important to take into account. The second thing is we're putting a lot of elements under one same roof, increasing the complexity of the task. And so there are specialists in mediation arbitration. There are specialists in patent registers. There are specialists in essentiality. There are people, looking at market data in terms of value, etc. We're putting all that under one roof, and that increases enormously, I think, the complexity of doing that task.
Thank you, Patrick. So looking at the time, so there is, thank you, Matthias, also for answering one of the questions directly, I think. So we've been dealing with that one already, but there is another question which I would like to rephrase a little bit. So it looks more on the incoming side with EU IPO and what would be the return on investment for EU IPO as a competence center by doing the front, licensing and also, of course, the essentiality tests and so on. But I would look at that question more from what has been mentioned by many of you actually, and that is the cost side, the burden side on SMEs as for the registry, the essentiality checks, and all of that. And I really wonder whether that is a serious case, whether it is something where we have to be worried about, or isn't it, if we in particular, if it's referring to the fees, that question that will be covered by the EU IPO. If I may, my understanding, not the person in charge, but Anna, you might add a few lines on that, is that of course it has to be cost recovering. But it's not a profit center as all the organizations collecting fees in this field. So it's not going to be a profit center. That is at least my understanding. But of course there have to be collected some fees, and some people, SMEs, might have lower fees. So, but again, so the question is more, okay, what's the burden, and is this a serious threat here? But so if people want to react to that, maybe start with Roderick, please.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'd like to draw a parallel with what happens today. That a small company, Continental is a big company, but we use like 100 different standards. We have SEPs where we may have 1, 2, 3 for a standard that's moderately used. I think here it's good to look at what happens with pools. That with pools, many of them say, and I've seen that many of them do these essentiality checks. It works for SMEs. The key here is this bundling, that just as the regulation would do with having the competence center, that the pool sort of collects the different patents from those who want to license. It organizes essentiality checks. Of course, there are costs connected with this, but any good business will only put the patents in the pool, and the pool will only cover the costs of these essentiality checks if the expectation is that you'll get more money from licensing with the efficiencies that come from a pool than you have to spend for the essentiality checks. So I think when we discuss these theoretical problems of costs for this and that, it's good to take a look at what works today. And I think here we can see that essentiality checks do work for pools. Thanks.
Thanks. So now again, Agnieszka and then Matthias.
So costs are, I addressed some of the aspects of the costs in my presentation, so I think I'm not going to go back to those points. But what are the costs? Shall we only look at these financial lines? I believe that the costs are multifold. One are just administrative and financial burdens, compliance. To right holders, the biggest cost that we see is in case of erroneous entry into the registry, there is a loss of the right to economically use the patent and legally use it as a legal tool, legal instrument as well. So that's a threat, and in case of such situation, it is a cost for right holders. But there are other costs which are much more global, and one of them was mentioned by Matthias and I think also by Patrick. One big cost to the European landscape is the potential that the quality of our adjudication in Europe will not be used as it is used now. So the expertise that has been built up in standard essential patent licensing, which benefits European companies by the simple fact of familiarity with the system and using the system, this will move away most likely because of the imposed delay due to fund conciliation mechanism. That's one. Another huge cost that also hasn't been touched on today is that currently the way the draft regulation is set up, it becomes a numbers counting game. How many essential patents? 100, 300, 500? What is the royalty rate? What is the size of the pie and how it will be divided? All of it focuses on the numbers, and it moves away from the clear focus that the European industry and the open standardization has created, which was and it is the only edge currently that Europe still has, which is quality. How will this quality be accounted for in this numbers game? I believe it is one of the biggest costs that we will encounter, and it is something that is easily overlooked because it's not simple. It's not something that will, fall on us within a year or two of the implementation of the regulation. The ecosystem works in 20-year cycles. That's how long it takes from R&D investment decision to products on the market, which go through R&D, open standardization, productization, commercialization. It's 20 years. But in 20 years, it will be too late, unfortunately, to realize that it wasn't the right decision to pursue this regulatory intervention. So these are the costs from my side. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Agnieszka. And now, Matthias, you have 1 minute. That leaves me 1 minute to close then, because I'm asked to be on time.
I just wanted to give a very, very short feedback to Roderick's comment on pools. I actually like the way pools are handled in the regulation. I don't think it's going to work exactly as they planned it, but this is quite close to it. The problem really is that there are too many restrictions on pools in the regulation, so pools will move out of Europe just to avoid the regulation. That was my point that I wanted to make earlier. So yes, pools are interesting, but you really have to look at them, and they won't work in many standardization areas. They do in others.
Thank you, Matthias, and thanks all the speakers, all the panelists. I think this was very interesting. I have to close now, but I would like to say one final word, so to speak, and that is simply, I think, of course, we can discuss this and continue discussing this, and I think this is important to continue the exchange. But of course, I mean, we will have to follow very closely, what will happen then on the policy, in the policy arena. And that's where things will happen. And as Anne pointed out at the beginning, we'll probably have to wait another half a year, which shouldn't mean that in the meantime we're not going to discuss. I think so. Good to continue discussing. I think this is very important. I mean, you have hinted at the far-reaching implementations this might have, positive or negative. I did take note. I mean, my personal note is actually that starting this discussion at the European level has triggered, some more interest that previously did not exist elsewhere in the world, such as in the United States, for instance. I also noted that, for instance, WIPO came up with a very general, but still they looked into this issue, with their WIPO strategy on standard essential patterns, for instance. It's been a field that previously hasn't been looked into by WIPO. So, I mean, what it does definitely, this topic and the discussion that we have, it opens, really, and new players come in. And I think that's what all of this is about for the time being. And then, of course, we will have to see how policymakers are going to decide. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much and have a great day. And I hope to meet some of you in the next future in person again. It would be great. We haven't met well, some of you we haven't met in quite a while, so so it would be nice to meet again. Thanks, and thanks also for the audience for their patience and for the good questions that we've received. Thanks a lot. Okay, goodbye then.
Yeah.
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.